On a cold November night in 1987, the tranquility of Ina, Illinois, was shattered by a brutal act of violence that remains unsolved to this day. The Dardeen family, a family of 4, including a newborn child, was mercilessly slaughtered in their small mobile home. The brutality of the murders sent shockwaves through the community, and over 35 years later, the case is still cold. Tonight, we will take you through the chilling events of that night, examine the strange clues left behind, explore the various theories surrounding the case, and uncover what might have motivated this horrific crime. We'll also delve into the lives of Keith, Elaine, and their children, a family who never expected their lives to end in such a senseless manner. But before we begin, if you enjoy true crime stories and unsolved mysteries, don't forget to subscribe to Whispers in the Dark. Make sure to hit the like button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into these chilling tales. Ina, Illinois, a small town located in Jefferson County, is not the kind of place where people expect tragedy. With a population of less than 500 people, Ina is a quintessential example of rural American life. For the Dardeen family, the move to Ina was supposed to represent a fresh start, a quiet, safe environment to raise their children. Keith Dardine worked at the nearby water treatment plant, a steady job that allowed him to support his growing family. Elaine stayed at home, caring for their son Peter, who was just 3 years old, and preparing for the arrival of their second child. In 1987, the Dardines were seen as an ordinary, hard-working family. They were active members of their local Baptist church, and their neighbors described them as friendly but private. The Dardines rented a modest mobile home on the outskirts of town, a place where they could live peacefully, away from the chaos of city life. Keith was known to be an attentive father and husband, and Elaine was a devoted mother who was eagerly awaiting the birth of their second child. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic life, there were signs that Keith was becoming increasingly worried about the safety of his family. In the months leading up to the murders, Keith had expressed concern about the rising crime rate in the area. He had even considered moving the family out of Ina altogether. Tragically, they never got the chance. November 18, 1987, began like any other day for the Dardines. Keith went to work at the water treatment plant, and Elaine stayed home with Peter. Neighbors later reported that nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Keith was scheduled to play in a local church basketball game that evening, but he never showed up. When his employer called the next day to report that Keith had not come to work, concern began to grow. Keith's parents, who lived nearby, immediately sensed something was wrong. They contacted the police, who arrived at the Dardines' mobile home to conduct a welfare check. What they found inside was beyond anything the small-town police department had ever seen. Elaine and Peter were found in the bedroom, their bodies beaten so severely that it was difficult to identify them at first. Elaine, who had been pregnant, had gone into labor during the attack. Her newborn child, who had just entered the world moments before, was also beaten to death. The murder weapon, a baseball bat that belonged to Peter, was found next to their bodies, covered in blood. At first, police wondered if Keith had committed the murders before fleeing the scene, but that theory was quickly dismissed when Keith's body was found the next day in a nearby field. He had been shot multiple times and left in a ditch. The murders were brutal, calculated, and merciless, but the motive remained unclear. The crime scene inside the Dardeen home was nothing short of nightmarish. Elaine and Peter had been savagely beaten to death, and the baseball bat, a symbol of childhood innocence, had been used as a murder weapon in one of the most horrific ways imaginable. Elaine had gone into labor during the attack, and the newborn baby, who had not even taken its first breath, was also bludgeoned. The sheer violence of the murders suggested intense rage, but investigators were baffled as to who could have harbored such hatred toward the Dardines. There was no sign of forced entry, and nothing appeared to have been stolen from the home. Elaine and Peter were found in the bedroom, suggesting they may have been asleep when the attack began. Keith's body was found several miles away from the home, shot multiple times and left in a field. His murder appeared to be more methodical, leading some to speculate that he had been abducted and killed elsewhere before his family was slaughtered. The gruesome nature of the crime scene raised more questions than answers. Was this a random act of violence? Or had the Dardines been targeted for a specific reason? Was Keith the primary target? Or was his family killed as part of a broader plan? The brutality of the murders left investigators reeling, but they had little to go on in terms of evidence. The discovery of the Dardeen family's bodies sent shockwaves through the small town of Ina. News of the murders spread quickly, and fear gripped the community. The idea that such a horrific crime could take place in their quiet town was unimaginable. Many families began locking their doors for the first time, and some even considered moving away, fearing that the killer might strike again. The police, despite their best efforts, struggled to make progress in the investigation. There were no obvious suspects, no clear motive, and no physical evidence that could point to the killer. Local residents were interviewed, but no one had seen anything suspicious in the days leading up to the murders. The Dardines were well-liked and had no known enemies, making the crime all the more baffling. In the weeks that followed, investigators worked tirelessly to gather any leads they could find. They conducted interviews, reviewed forensic evidence, and reached out to state and federal agencies for assistance. Despite their efforts, the case quickly went cold. The lack of evidence and the seemingly random nature of the crime hinted one of the most perplexing murder cases in Illinois history. In the aftermath of the murders, investigators faced an uphill battle. The brutality of the crime shocked even the most seasoned detectives, and they quickly realized that they were dealing with a highly complex case. One of the most puzzling aspects of the crime was the lack of forensic evidence. In an era before advanced DNA testing, investigators had limited tools at their disposal. While they collected blood samples, hair, and fibers from the crime scene, there was little that could definitively point them toward a suspect. Theories began to circulate about what might have motivated the killer or killers. Some speculated that the murders were the result of a robbery gone wrong, but the lack of stolen items made that theory less likely. Others wondered if Keith had become involved in something illicit, perhaps drugs or a shady business deal, that had led to his family's murder as retribution. However, there was no evidence to suggest that Keith was involved in any illegal activity. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation began to stall. The lack of concrete leads left investigators grasping for answers, and the case grew colder with each passing day. Despite extensive media coverage and appeals for information, no new clues emerged. As the investigation dragged on, law enforcement and the media began to speculate about possible motives and suspects. One theory that gained traction was that the Dardeen murders were the work of a drifter or serial killer passing through the area. At the time, the region had seen several cases of random violence, including the murder of a woman at a nearby truck stop. Could the same person have been responsible for the Dardeens' deaths? Another theory focused on a man, Tommy Lynn Sells, a notorious serial killer who had been arrested for other murders in the early 1990s. Sells would later confess to the Dardeen murders, claiming that he had entered their home, attacked Elaine and Peter, and then forced Keith to drive to the field where he was killed. However, Sells' confession was met with skepticism by investigators who pointed out inconsistencies in his story and a lack of physical evidence linking him to the crime. There were also whispers within the community that someone closer to the family that have been involved. Could a family member or acquaintance have harbored a grudge against Keith or Elaine? The lack of any known enemies made this theory difficult to prove, but investigators did not rule it out entirely. As the years passed, the Dardeen case continued to haunt the town of Ina. For the family members left behind, the loss was unimaginable. Keith's parents, in particular, were devastated by the death of their son and his family. They had been the ones to contact the police when Keith did not show up for work, and they had hoped for answers that never came. The case, now over 3 decades old, remains unsolved. Despite numerous tips and leads over the years, none have led to a breakthrough in the case. For many residents of Ina, the murders serve as a grim reminder that even the smallest, safest communities are not immune to violence. Keith, Elaine, Peter, and their unborn child are remembered as victims of one of the most brutal and senseless crimes in Illinois history, more than 35 years after the murders of the Dardeen family. The case remains cold. Despite the best efforts of investigators, the killer has never been caught, and the motive behind the crime remains a mystery. For the people of Aina, the Dardeen family is forever etched in the town's memory, a tragic reminder of how quickly life can be snuffed out by senseless violence. As we close this episode of Whispers in the Dark, we ask you to keep the Dardeen family in your thoughts. And if you have any information, no matter how small, please contact the authorities. The killer may still be out there, waiting for justice to finally catch up with them.